What if a piece of paper frozen to a dying horse could reveal a secret so devastating it would unite an entire town? A struggling rancher had barely enough to keep his own animals alive through the brutal winter in his 40s. A pregnant mare stood shivering in a blizzard, hours from death, with a letter tied to her halter that no one was meant to read. He could have looked away. He could have called someone else. But what he discovered in that letter, and the impossible chain of events it set in motion, would challenge everything he believed about duty, sacrifice, and the strange ways that broken hearts can heal each other. This is a story that will restore your faith in the quiet heroism of ordinary people. If you believe that sometimes the hardest winters lead to the most beautiful springs, please hit that like button and subscribe. It truly helps us share more stories of juniper and courage. The plains of Wyoming in January are a study in brutality. The wind doesn't simply blow across the open grasslands. It attacks, screaming down from the mountains with a violence that strips the world to its essential cruelty. The snow comes in waves, thick and blinding, erasing roads and fences in any sense of direction. The cold is not just temperature. It is a physical presence, a predator that hunts for weakness in walls and clothing and flesh. It finds the gaps. It always finds the gaps. This is a land that teaches humility or kills you trying. Vitto Brennan understood this lesson in his bones. At 47, he ran a small cattle ranch outside the town of Riverside, a collection of weathered buildings and corrals that clung to existence through sheer stubbornness. His herd was small, 60 head of Angus that grazed the rough country, and every winter was a test of whether they'd make it through to spring. His wife had left 3 years earlier, tired of the isolation and the poverty and the endless grinding work that yielded so little. His daughter was away at college, working 2 jobs to pay for what his ranch couldn't provide. Vitto lived alone now in a house that felt too big and too empty, rising before dawn to break ice on water tanks and haul feed through drifts that sometimes reached his chest. He was tired in a way that sleep couldn't fix. His bank account showed numbers that made his stomach clench. The tractor needed repairs he couldn't afford. But he kept going because that's what you did. You kept going until you couldn't anymore. On the night of January 15th, the Weather Service issued a blizzard warning. Vitto had heard it crackling over the radio while he was fixing a broken stall door in the barn, his hands numb despite the gloves. The storm was supposed to hit around midnight. Heavy snow and winds gusting to 50 miles per hour. Temperatures dropping to 20 below zero. He'd spent the evening making preparations, moving the cattle closer to the barns, stacking extra hay, filling every container with water. By 10 o'clock, the first flakes were falling, small and hard as gravel, ticking against the windows like impatient fingers. Vitto stood on his porch, a mug of coffee cooling in his hands, and watched the darkness swallow the land. The wind was already rising, a low moan that would build to a scream. He went to bed knowing he wouldn't sleep much, listening to the house creak and groan under the assault. Around 2 in the morning, something woke him. Not the storm, something else. A sound that didn't belong. He lay in the darkness, his heart beating hard, listening. There it was again, a horse, calling, not one of his. He knew the voices of his 3 horses as well as he knew his own. This was different, higher pitched, desperate. Vitto threw back the covers, the cold air hitting him like a slap. He dressed quickly, layering thermal underwear, jeans, 2 shirts, his heavy canvas coat. He pulled on insulated boots, wrapped a scarf around his face, and grabbed his flashlight. The wind nearly tore the door from his hands when he opened it. The world outside was chaos, a whiteout of driving snow that stung his exposed skin like needles. He couldn't see more than a few feet. The cold seared his lungs with every breath. He followed the sound. The horse was calling again, a high, panicked whinny that cut through the storm. Vitto fought his way toward it, the beam of his flashlight swallowed by the blowing snow. His boots sank deep with each step. The wind shoved him sideways, trying to knock him down. He kept going, one hand raised to shield his face, squinting against the assault. The sound was coming from near the road, maybe 100 yards from his barn. What was a horse doing out there? Had one of his gotten loose? But the gate to his pasture was secure. He checked it himself. The beam of his flashlight caught movement, a shape in the snow, dark against white. Vitto stumbled forward. It was a horse, a mare, standing with her head down, her body hunched against the wind. She was wearing a halter but no blanket, her coat thick with ice and snow. She was shaking so violently he could see it even through the storm. Vitto's breath caught. She was heavily pregnant. Her belly was distended, her flanks hollow above it. She lifted her head as he approached, her eyes rolling wide with fear and exhaustion. She tried to move away but stumbled, her legs barely holding her. "Easy," Vitto said, his voice muffled by the scarf. "Easy, Mama. I'm not going to hurt you." He reached her, his gloved hand touching her neck. She flinched but didn't have the strength to flee. Her body was ice cold beneath the frozen coat. She'd been out here for hours, maybe longer. She should already be dead. Vitto swept his flashlight over her looking for injuries, and that's when he saw it. Attached to her halter, secured with balin twine, was a piece of paper sealed inside a plastic bag. The bag was crusted with ice, but he could see writing inside. Vitto's hand shook as he fumbled with the twine, his fingers thick and clumsy in the heavy gloves. The knot was frozen solid. He pulled his knife from his pocket and cut it free. He held the bag up to the flashlight. The paper inside was lined notebook paper, covered in handwriting. Blue ink, a woman's careful script. He couldn't read it here, not in the storm, but something about it, the way it was attached, the deliberate care of the plastic protection, sent a cold dread through his chest that had nothing to do with the temperature. This wasn't an accident. Someone had put this mare out here. Someone had left her to die. With a message. Vitto looked at the mare. She was watching him now, her breath coming in ragged clouds. Her legs were trembling. She wouldn't last another hour. "Move," he told himself. "Read it later. Move now." He wrapped his hand around the lead rope attached to her halter and began to pull gently. "Come on, girl. Come on. You have to walk." The mare resisted, too frightened and too weak. Vitto positioned himself beside her, using his body to block some of the wind, and pushed gently against her shoulder. She took one step, then another. They began the agonizing journey back to the barn, moving inches at a time through drifts that reached the mare's chest. Vitto's lungs burned, his legs screamed. Twice the mare went down to her knees, and he had to coax her back up, his voice a constant stream of encouragement that the wind tore away. When they finally reached the barn, Vitto's entire body was shaken with exhaustion and cold. He led the mare into an empty stall, the warmth of the barn hitting them like a physical force after the brutal cold outside. The mare stood with her head hanging, swaying slightly. Vitto worked quickly, his movements automatic despite his exhaustion. He stripped the frozen halter from the mare's head and replaced it with a soft rope halter from his tack room. He grabbed every blanket he owned and piled them over her trembling body, buckling them tight. He brought warm water mixed with molasses and held the bucket for her. She drank in desperate gulps, water spilling from her mouth. He filled a hay net and hung it where she could reach. Then he stood back, breathing hard, and really looked at her for the first time. She was a quarter horse, probably around 15 hands, with a pretty head and good bone. Her coat, beneath the ice and mud, was a dark bay. She'd been beautiful once. She was Dagwoodvin. He could count every rib. Her hip bones jutted sharply. Her neck was thin, the muscles wasted. But her belly was huge, the foal inside pressing visibly against her sides. She was close, very close. Days, maybe, a week at most. How could anyone let a pregnant mare get to this condition? How could anyone tie her to a post and leave her in a blizzard? Vitto's hands clenched. He felt a hot rage building in his chest, cutting through the cold numbness. He looked down at the plastic bag still clutched in his hand. The letter. He pulled off his gloves and carefully opened the bag, extracting the damp paper. He unfolded it under the barn's single overhead light. The handwriting was neat but shaky, as if written in a hurry or under great stress. He began to read. His name is Dagwood because of the white mark on her face. She is 9 years old. She is due to foal in less than a week. I'm leaving her with you because I have no choice left. Please don't hate me. Vitto's throat tightened. He kept reading. My name is Tabitha. My husband died 6 months ago. Truck accident. No insurance. We had a small farm, 12 horses, a few cattle. I thought I could manage. I was wrong. The bank took everything. The house, the land, all of it. I sold what I could to pay the debts. I found homes for most of the horses. But Dagwood. Nobody wanted a pregnant mare in this condition. Nobody wanted the responsibility. I tried. I called every rescue, every sanctuary. They're all full. They all said no. I have been living in my car for 3 weeks with my 2 children. We are going to my sister's in Colorado. She has room for us, but not for a horse. I cannot take Dagwood. I cannot afford a vet to put her down humanely. I know what I am doing is terrible. I know you will think I am a monster. Maybe I am, but I am also a mother who is out of options. I chose your ranch because I drove past it once and saw how you cared for your animals. I saw that your horses had good shelter and clean water, and I thought, maybe you are the kind of person who would not let her suffer. If you cannot keep her, please call a vet. Please don't let her, Dagwood. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. There was no signature. Just those words, written by a hand that had probably been shaking as badly as Vitto's was now. He read it again, then a third time. The anger drained out of him, replaced by something heavier. Grief, pity, a recognition of the terrible mathematics of desperation. He folded the letter carefully and put it back in the plastic bag. He looked at the mare, Dagwood, standing in the stall with her head lowered, exhausted beyond fear. She'd been loved once. That much was clear. Someone had named her. Someone had cared enough to try. Vitto didn't sleep that night. He sat on an overturned bucket outside Dagwood's stall, wrapped in a blanket, watching her. She dozed, standing up, her body swaying slightly, the blankets rising and falling with her breath. Every 20 minutes, he checked her water and adjusted her blankets. Around 5 in the morning, she lay down for the first time, groaning as her heavy body settled into the deep straw. Vitto held his breath, watching for signs of labor. But she was just resting, her eyes half closed, her sides expanding with the foal's movements. By dawn, the storm had passed. The world outside was buried under 2 feet of fresh snow, the sky a brittle, cloudless blue. Vitto fed his own animals, moving through the familiar routine on autopilot, his mind elsewhere. He called Doc Harrison, the only large animal vet within 50 miles, and left a message. He needed someone to check the mare. He needed to know if the foal was viable. He needed to know if any of this had a chance. Doc called back around 9. "Heard you pulled a mare out of the storm," Doc said. His voice was rough, worn down by 30 years of answering calls in all weather. Vitto told him everything. The letter, the condition, the pregnancy. There was a long silence on the other end. "I'll come out this afternoon," Doc said finally. "But Vitto, you need to prepare yourself. A mare in that condition, carrying a foal, after exposure like that, the odds aren't good." "I know," Vitto said, "but I have to try." "Why?" Doc asked. It wasn't cruel. It was genuine curiosity. "She's not your responsibility. Someone made her your problem." "Because someone else already gave up on her," Vitto said. His voice was harder than he'd intended. Doc arrived at 3, his ancient truck rattling up the snowpack drive. He was a lean man in his 60s, with silver hair and hands that had delivered more foals than he could count. He examined Dagwood with quiet competence, his fingers gentle on her wasted body, his stethoscope pressed to her distended belly. Vitto stood outside the stall, arms crossed, jaw tight. After 20 minutes, Doc straightened up and walked out, closing the stall door behind him. "Well?" Vitto asked. "The mare's malnourished and dehydrated," Doc said, "but she's tougher than she looks. The foal's alive. I can hear a strong heartbeat. The position feels right. She could foal any day now." "And," Vitto pressed, "and she needs careful monitoring, high-risk delivery. The foal could be weak. The mare might not have enough strength to push. You're looking at round-the-clock watch for at least a week, then intensive care for both of them if they make it through." Doc paused. "This is going to cost money, Vitto. Grain, supplements, possible vet intervention during delivery. Can you afford it?" Vitto looked past him at Dagwood, who was watching them with dark, intelligent eyes. Could he afford it? No. His account was already stretched. Feed prices were up. His truck needed new tires. His daughter needed books for next semester. But he thought about the letter, about a woman living in her car with 2 children, writing an apology to a stranger, about the desperate calculation that had led her to tie her horse to a post in a blizzard because it was the only option she could see. "I'll manage," Vitto said. Doc studied him. "You're a stubborn fool, Vitto Brennan." "I know," Vitto said. Doc almost smiled. "All right, then." The next week was a test of endurance. Vitto moved a cot into the barn and slept in his clothes, waking every hour to check on Dagwood. He fed her small meals 6 times a day, high-quality hay and grain mixed with supplements Doc had provided. He brushed her coat until it began to shine again, talking to her in a low, steady voice, building trust with every gentle touch. She began to gain weight, slowly. The hollows in her neck filled in slightly. Her eyes lost some of their haunted look, but her belly grew tighter, the foal shifting and kicking. She was close. On the 8th night after he'd found her, Vitto woke to the sound of distress. He sat up on the cot, instantly alert. Dagwood was pacing in her stall, her breath coming in hard snorts. She circled once, twice, then pawed at the straw. Her water broke with a rush, soaking the bedding. "This is it," Vitto whispered. He called Doc, who answered on the second ring. He was 20 minutes away. Vitto stayed in the stall, keeping his distance, letting Dagwood do what nature designed her to do, but ready to intervene if needed. She lay down. She strained. An hour passed, then 2. Doc arrived and slipped into the stall beside Vitto. They watched together in the dim light. The foal's front hooves appeared, small and perfect, encased in the white membrane. Then the nose. Dagwood pushed, groaning with effort. "Come on, Mama," Vitto whispered. "You can do this." With one final, tremendous push, the foal slipped free in a rush of fluid. Dagwood immediately turned, her exhaustion forgotten, and began to lick the tiny body with fierce, desperate love. The foal was a filly, small but perfectly formed, dark bay like her mother, with 4 white socks and a blazer that ran from forehead to nose. She lifted her head almost immediately, blinking in the light. Vitto felt something break open in his chest. Doc was smiling, a rare, genuine expression. "Well," he said softly, "I'll be damned." The filly tried to stand within 20 minutes, her long legs splaying and folding beneath her. She fell twice. On the 3rd try, with Dagwood nickering encouragement, she found her balance. She stood, wobbling but determined, and began to search for milk. When she found it and began to nurse, Dagwood's eyes half closed in relief and contentment. Vitto turned away. His eyes were burning. He walked out of the stall and stood in the cold barn doorway, looking at the Dagwoods. Behind him, he heard Doc packing up his equipment. "You did good, Vitto," Doc said quietly. "Real good." Vitto just nodded. He didn't trust his voice. News traveled fast in a small town. By the next morning, half of Riverside knew about the mare and the foal and the letter. By afternoon, Vitto's phone was ringing. The first call was from the feed store. They were donating a month's supply of grain and supplements. The second was from the local tack shop. They had blankets and halters they wanted to contribute. The third was from a woman named Helen, who ran a small rescue 20 miles away. She'd heard about the letter. She wanted to know if she could share it, anonymously, to raise awareness about the impossible choices people faced. Vitto hesitated. Then he thought about the woman, the one who'd written those words in desperation and shame. Maybe her story could help others. Maybe it could change something. "Yes," Vitto said. "Share it." Within a week, the letter had spread beyond the county. Someone had posted it online. It went viral. Donations began to pour in. People sent money for Dagwood's care, for the foal, for Vitto's ranch. They sent blankets and grain and veterinary supplies. They sent letters, hundreds of them, telling their own stories of loss and impossible choices and the guilt that came with both. Vitto was overwhelmed. He'd never asked for help. He'd spent his entire adult life believing that asking was the same as failing. But here it was, arriving unsought, a cascade of generosity from strangers who saw something in this story that resonated with their own struggles. The local newspaper ran a feature. A television crew came from the nearest city. Vitto hated the attention, but he endured it because it meant more resources for Dagwood and her filly. He named the foal Juniper. It seemed appropriate. By March, Dagwood had gained 100 pounds. Her coat gleamed. Her eyes were bright and calm. Juniper grew fast, all legs and curiosity, racing around the small paddock Vitto had set up for them, bucking at nothing, her white-socked legs flashing. Vitto watched them every day, leaning on the fence, a feeling in his chest that he'd almost forgotten. Peace, purpose. One afternoon, a car pulled up his drive. A woman got out, mid-30s, with 2 children clinging to her hands. She walked toward Vitto slowly, her face pale and uncertain. Vitto knew before she spoke. "You're the one who wrote the letter," he said, gently. The woman's face crumpled. She nodded. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. I'm so sorry. I had to know if she was okay. If they were okay. Vitto looked at the children, a boy and a girl, maybe 7 and 9, their faces solemn and watchful. Then he looked back at the woman. "Come see," he said. He led them to the paddock. Dagwood was grazing in the pale spring sun, her body healthy and strong. Juniper was beside her, nursing contentedly, her small tail swishing. The woman stopped at the fence. Her hands gripped the top rail. She made a sound, half sob, half laugh. "Oh," she breathed. "Oh, they're beautiful." Dagwood lifted her head. She looked at the woman. For a long moment they Dagwooded at each other across the distance. Then Dagwood turned back to her foal. The woman was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. The children pressed against her sides. "Thank you," she said to Vitto. Her voice was raw. "Thank you for not hating me." "I never hated you," Vitto said. He meant it. "I just hated what the world did to you." They talked for an hour. Her name was Tabitha, just as the letter had said. She and her children were living with her sister in Colorado now. She'd found work. The kids were in school. They were surviving. She'd followed the story online, seen the photos of Dagwood and Juniper, and finally gathered the courage to come back. "I wanted to take her with me that night," she said. "I stood in the storm with her for 2 hours trying to figure out a way. But there was no way. There was no room, no money, no options." "I know," Vitto said. She looked at him. "Why did you save her?" Vitto was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Because someone had to. And because I think maybe we all need to be saved sometimes." When they left, Tabitha hugged him. The children waved from the car window. Vitto watched them drive away, then turned back to the paddock. Dagwood and Juniper were standing together, the late afternoon light turning their coats to copper. Spring arrived in full force. The snow melted, the grass turned green. Dagwood and Juniper spent their days in the pasture, the filly growing stronger and bolder by the week. Vitto's ranch, buoyed by the unexpected donations and the attention, stabilized. He was able to fix the tractor, replace some fence, buy quality feed. For the first time in years, he wasn't drowning. Doc Harrison stopped by regularly, checking on Dagwood and Juniper, but really just visiting, admitting over coffee that he'd gotten invested in their story. The town adopted them as a symbol of something. Vitto wasn't sure what. Resilience, maybe. Juniper, certainly. The local school brought children on field trips to meet the famous rescue horse and her foal. Vitto, uncomfortable with the attention, nonetheless found himself telling the story again and again, always emphasizing that the real hero wasn't him. It was the mother who'd made an impossible choice. By summer, Juniper was weaned. She was a sturdy, confident filly with her mother's intelligence and a boldness all her own. Dagwood had regained every pound she'd lost and more. She was a beautiful, healthy horse, gentle and trusting, showing no signs of the trauma she'd endured. Vitto began to train them both, Dagwoodton with the basics, teaching them to lead and stand and accept handling. They were quick learners. One evening in July, Vitto sat on his porch with a cold drink, watching Dagwood and Juniper graze in the golden light. His phone rang. It was the director of a therapeutic riding program 2 counties over. They'd heard about Dagwood and Juniper. They wondered if Vitto would consider donating them, or at least allowing them to be part of the program. Rescued horses helping to rescue people. Vitto's first instinct was to say no. These were his horses. He'd saved them. But then he thought about the letter, about Tabitha and her children, about the chain of grace that had brought them all here. He thought about what Doc had said that first night. This is going to cost money. Vitto had managed the cost, but maybe there was a better purpose waiting. Tell me more, Vitto said. By autumn, the arrangement was made. Dagwood and Juniper would move to the therapeutic center. They'd work with children who had disabilities, with veterans dealing with trauma, with people who needed healing. Vitto would visit regularly. They'd always be his in the way that mattered. The day they left, Vitto stood in the empty paddock and cried. He wasn't ashamed. These were good tears. Earned tears. Over the following months, he received updates. Photos of Dagwood standing calm and patient while a child in a wheelchair brushed her. Videos of Juniper, now a yearling, walking beside a veteran who hadn't spoken in months, the man's hand resting on her neck, his eyes bright. Letters from parents thanking him for sharing his horses, for giving their children a chance to connect with something gentle and healing. Vitto kept every one. Tabitha called him on Christmas. She wanted him to know that she'd gotten a promotion at work, that her kids were thriving, that she thought about Dagwood every day and would forever be grateful. "You gave me back my humanity," she said. "You proved that even when you fail, even when you make the worst choice, it's not the end. Someone might still catch you." "We all need catching sometimes," Vitto said. After he hung up, he walked out to his barn. His 3 horses nickered in greeting. He stood in the quiet, breathing the familiar smells of hay and leather, and thought about the night he'd heard a cry in the storm. The impossible thing about grace, Vitto had learned, was that it multiplied. One act of mercy in a blizzard had become a wave of kindness that touched hundreds of lives. The woman who'd left a horse in desperation had been forgiven, not just by him, but by a community that understood that desperation wasn't the same as cruelty. The horses who should have died had become healers. And Vitto himself, a man who'd thought he had nothing left to give, had discovered that sometimes your greatest gift is simply refusing to look away. He thought about all the people out there right now, standing in their own storms, making impossible choices, carrying guilt and shame and fear. He thought about how many of them just needed someone to see them, to say it's okay, to offer a hand without judgment. Maybe that was the real lesson of Dagwood and Juniper, not the dramatic rescue in the blizzard, though that mattered, not the viral letter or the donations or the news stories, but the simple, radical act of witness, of seeing someone's pain and not turning away, of believing that every life, human or animal, deserved a chance at spring even in the deepest winter. Vitto went back inside as the first snow of the new season began to fall. He made a fire. He sat in his chair with a book he wouldn't read, watching the flames, thinking about a pregnant mare standing in a storm and the piece of paper that had changed everything. If this story moved you, subscribe to our channel and share it with someone who needs to remember that even our worst moments don't define us, that mercy is never wasted, and that sometimes the most broken things become the most beautiful when given a chance to heal.